Hello, guys. Here's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about this idea of what it means to like be in a sacred place. What does it mean to be in a sacred place? And then I don't know, I kept coming back to love. The sacred place is where you know yourself to be the truest. It's like the place where you know yourself closest to your true identity. And so I thought this pod today is the perfect explanation of that on some level. So we went ahead and talked about this movie coming out called American Orthodoxy with the director John Hammond. And it's really interesting because the truest identity in the film is very evidently the place where you're being fed in a sacred way in the Eucharist. And I think this applies to everybody. And so those are my thoughts, because I think you can pick the most atheistic, secularistic persons, but where they feel most themselves is maybe with the New York Times and a coffee on a Sunday morning. It's sacred to them on some place. It's where they feel love. Now, what do I think about that love? I don't think much about it. I don't know. It doesn't resonate with me. But maybe they're coming to themselves right then. This is a thought. This is Heavy Things Lightly. We go down that rabbit trail with John Hammond, who, let's face it, this guy is cool. It's nuts. Because every time he's like Forrest Gump. Ladies and gentlemen, Forrest Gump as John Hammond from California, the movie maker and director and writer of American Orthodoxy. Today on Heavy Things Lightly. To our, we can toast to Christe Agzda, Christ is risen. We can do that.
Yes.
That's a good way to start in this season.
Yes.
But I'd like to also toast to the starting of something like we keep crossing paths with your art, and to art and to your work and to Christ being risen. Gagi Marjos. Cheers. Gagi Marjos.
Christos Voskresi.
Voistino Voskresi.
In Zastarovia and Mirumir.
And Mirumir. Yeah, that's true. So you got to start with this. So for those of you who don't know, this is John Hammond. He's a filmmaker and a writer and an artisan of many things. So I did the intro. They just heard the intro. But how would you describe you if you, I don't know, it was your last moments? Remember me as this man.
John, sinner.
Yeah, good. See?
Have mercy on me. Thus, not a sinner, but the sinner. That's how I would probably say, just have mercy on me. Back to worldly recognition, that would be probably it. But what I do, or what I have tried to do, is to be a Christian who wants to shine the light. God gives, the light. And he says, Christ says, I am the light of the world. But he also says, you're the light of the world.
Yeah.
He says that to his disciples, who I hope to be considered a, quote, a disciple or follower of Christ. And so that's what I want to do, is shine light, that God's given the light of the world.
Yeah. Would you say that's led you, were you always doing that from when you were a little kid? Do you think there's something like that going on? Or
No, I was a pretty bad kid. If, not to get my quote whole life story, but when you say, have I always done that? No,
had you always known yourself that way? Not really. I see. So you had a conversion process of some sort.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Even though I was given, those opportunities, my father is always retired now. My mother was a teacher, and, we lived, I won't go over my whole story per se, but
it's kind of interesting, maybe, perhaps.
Well, maybe. Yeah. So we lived, I was born a poor black child.
Yeah. Wait, is that Steve? That's Steve Martin.
Another reference. Yeah. That was me. Yeah, the jerk.
That's for old people. You guys, if you know the jerk, one is we can hang out He was, if you're laughing, then we can hang out too, because it was funny.
Yeah. So
some people were like, that was very impious movie. Calm down. It was funny. It was a funny movie. No, so okay. You were born a poor black child. That counts for something. I want to hear about it.
Yeah, well, literally, my dad was a military. Actually, he was in the ROTC, Howard University, black college.
You want to hear something? I studied in Washington D.C. and did a semester up studying at Howard, so I know about that joint. Yeah.
Yeah, so we lived there. My father and mother he was at Hampton, which is in Virginia. Hampton University. It was called Hampton Institute at the time, black college again. Both my parents went there, and that's where they met, and they got married. He was in ROTC at the time, and so I was born in actually Portsmouth, Virginia, at the Naval Hospital. My dad was military, and he became an officer.
What branch?
Army. Yeah, he was Army, artillery lieutenant, and then he became a captain. And we went from Washington, D.C., where we lived at the time, where he was at Howard. And then we went to, let's see. My life was moved around a lot, and I was a little kid.
Let me ask you this.
All the details. I was actually there when Kennedy was inaugurated. So I'm that old. I'm a quote boomer as
you were there.
Literally. Yeah. In Washington, D.C. My dad actually went to the inauguration of Kennedy. I was there. We moved from Washington, D.C. to the state of Washington, Fort Lewis, Washington. He was stationed there as a officer, and he was a doctor, or he was becoming a doctor, finalizing his residency and all that.
So you're like 100 years old, but you look 40. See, black folks, what's up with that? Blacks don't crack. That's how it works.
That's what I was going to say that, but you beat me to it.
I beat you to it. I know about this in my own life.
I know.
Not because I'm black.
I know.
No, come on. I married a black girl.
Family,
what happens? I own some of that, don't I?
That's right. Yeah.
Come on.
You're fam.
Yeah, I'm in the fam. Come on, John. Give me some credit.
I get it.
I'm interested in this. So that's a military kid, a black kid in the military. When you were in school then, you were probably mixed classes, right? It was pretty, there were a lot of white kids around and when you came up.
Yeah. Most of my life growing up, as far as especially elementary school, I was in many, like I said, we went from Washington, D.C. to Washington State. And I was literally the only black kid in my class for many years. And we went from like second grade. Then we moved to Santa Maria, California. Well, actually, we lived in Morro Bay for a year. I don't know if you know where that is. It's like along the coast.
Wow, you were everywhere. This is what happened.
Yeah. It was like every year, it was like a different school. Second grade was a different school. Third grade. And then we moved there to Santa Maria was where I kind of grew up. So Santa Maria, named after St. Mary. We were just down there for the weekend. In fact, there's a church down there, Annunciation Orthodox Church, that it wasn't Orthodox growing up, but that was a church we visited.
Do you think this? How did this inform? Let's say this. What did all this moving around in the military? What skills did it give you? Is it perseverance? Did it help you to make movies later? Did it help you to write? Or do you find it just an irritation? Were you upset as a kid?
No, I got along pretty well with a lot of the kids. I would say growing up in the military, again, it gave me a fascination with the military. We lived on a military base in Fort Lewis, officers' quarters. And I remember, the kids, we would go across the street out into the woods there, and we'd like find bullet shells and, like artillery shells. And so we'd always are
you a gun guy to this day?
Yeah. I don't have any guns right now, because of my, past. I actually, got in trouble a couple of times.
Oh, okay. So you meant it. You were running the wrong side of the tracks.
Carrying the wrong things in my, possessions. So that's a separate little story we can mention at some point. But I liked the army aren't playing army man, and we'd have our army jackets and boots. And, I still have, then I actually ended up getting into the military, believe it or not, they actually let me in. And I actually joined, the army, and I spent time in Fort Carson, Colorado, in Colorado, right next to, I could see NORAD. If you ever saw War Games, that movie.
Sure.
Was right outside my window.
NORAD also plays a role, or a lack of a role, in the whole 9/11 story.
Yeah, it's the North American Air Defense, and it has underground military bases, deep underground military bases, acronym DUM. So that's a lot of dumb stuff going on underground. It's crazy. There's a lot more to it than.
Did all of this? Did the military and joining it? Did it make you? Do you think less suspicious or more suspicious of the culture you lived in?
Well, let me put it this way. I read 1984 in high school, before 1984, before the year. And I joined the military in 1984. And not, that there's coincidences in those numbers or dates per se. But that was just the timing of when that happened. And I kind of did it as a, back, I don't know if you ever used to watch like Laurel and Hardy and some of those old crazy, guys would join like the French Foreign Legion, to kind of get away. It's like it was an escape, like an alternative to suicide. It's like, okay, I'm either going to destroy my life or I'm going to join the military just to get away or to get out of trouble. Yeah, someone's going to give me the fences I need, the war. Yeah, and it helped me. It was very good. I recommend, I don't necessarily say everyone should, go in the military now. My wife actually is a veteran as well. She was in the Air Force, which is probably, if you have a choice, if you're going to do that, that's probably a place. It's a lot more of a civil, place as far as, for people who have a little bit more sensitive, sensibilities, sensitive soul. But yeah, if you're hardcore, then go Marines, and, special forces, that type of stuff. I'm not that type of guy. I mean, I liked the action, but I was more, I went army, my dad was in the army and I used to want to be an quote army man as a kid. But then, growing up, I was pretty much like an anti-war kid too. I was a very anti-Vietnam War. If you joined in 84, were you involved in the early 90s Iraq War? I was able to get out of active duty, honorably discharged before that happened. I was involved in like Cold War. There's a lot of stuff that, we were in quote peacetime technically, but that means, peacetime means that we're not getting caught doing what we're doing. Yes. Because there's, South America, there's Middle East, there's Beirut, there's Panama, there's Nicaragua. 84 was Guatemalan Civil War, and I know we were mucking around in there for sure. Yeah, and there's, all kinds of activities. And I wasn't, I'm not saying I was involved in those personally, but I was in the military and I was in logistics. And so I was kind of more of a behind the scenes. I worked at like the headquarters, in, supplies of, so I would see what was going on and I would not involve like as far as, fighting any, wars. So I'm not going to put myself. How does all this fit with becoming a writer and now making these movies? Something happened or was it always there? And then tell us about the film and how the trailer is just magnificent. So tell us how there's a bridge here coming. I feel it. There's something. Let's see. How do I connect these crazy lives? And I lived a pretty crazy life. So I'll just put it that way, even before I got in the military and especially actually after, cause it can cause some reactions to your psyche, just being involved in things. I mean, especially, and I have a lot of friends, who were like really war veterans, and I'm not. When did the law come for you? Before or after you got out of the military? I had a little bit of trickiness when I was a kid, but fortunately the ways a lot of things work is sometimes you can kind of get stuff off of your record, because you're a juvenile. So I had some little troubles there because I grew up in the late 60s, 70s, the hippie movement. Yeah. So I'll just leave it to say that there's a lot of things that people were involved in, quote, people that, people I knew who did some crazy lifestyle stuff.
So there's this dude I got to see about a thing.
Yeah, I know this guy who knows a guy. And so, yeah, I'll say it that way, because I did get into the military with a, honorable, spent my honorable time in the military, and I got out honorably. So I'll put it that way.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not prying, because there's something about.
It got worse when I got out. I'll put it that way.
I see. But there's something about all that. You're a gentle soul that ended up making this gentle, beautiful movie. I'm fascinated.
Yeah. Well, I used to like to write when I was a kid. I was kind of more of a poet, and I wrote like kind of like glove poetry, and, I read a lot of literature, and I was into like Don Quixote and, those kinds of, tales, and, I would read even like Shakespeare, so I was, I studied like social protest literature. Back in 1984, as I mentioned earlier, that was one of the first books I read in high school, as it was an I had to get to choose social protest literature. It was one of my first electives in ninth grade.
Interesting.
And so I got to, we had to pick, different books to read that were like kind of anti-establishment or whatever. And that was my. Did you hear
The Last Poets? The Last Poets?
Oh yeah, I remember The Last Poets. Yeah, the poetry, very,
that feels, you feel like a lost poet guy. I used to ball with them. I used to play basketball with them uptown in New York City. And they were good. And we would joke. And then one day they said, you should check out our music. I was like, you dudes too old for music. And they had basically their first rappers. Some people say they're the first rappers.
Yeah. It's kind of like what they call spoken word, rap. It was like heavy. Yeah. I had quote albums, of theirs, and I listened to them.
They were good. Mm-hmm. They were good. So, okay. And then when do you start to dig down? This is a recent development, writing these books and making these movies?
Well, does this go back a ways? Here's where I first started writing literally books, is after I got out of the military, my life was kind of falling apart in a lot of ways. Went through, breakups and kind of spiraling downhill and so forth. And I was trying to function, at the same time, I had like health, mental, physical, spiritual, kind of didn't really know what was going on with my life. And my credit was so bad. That was one of the things that I learned first, is that it was so bad, I literally couldn't open up a savings account.
A savings account?
Yeah. Banks would not take I'd have like cash, and they said, can I open a savings account? And they'd look up my name. Sorry, sir. Security. Get out of here.
They didn't even want to hold your money.
No, they didn't want to even take my cash, because I had done so many things with like checks. I was a kind of a guy who would write like checks. And
I see.
As long as I've got checks, I got money, right? I can.
They think they're going to let you in the door, and then all bad stuff's going to happen.
Yeah, credit and check systems and all these TRW and all that stuff. They were like, whoa, this guy, warning.
But John, it turns out the banks are the bad guys. You turned out good.
Well, I was kind of a bad guy too, though, because a bank robber is not necessarily a good guy. And I wasn't always a bank robber, but I did have some, what they call 211 activity in my past.
You're going to make everyone Google 211 right now.
Yeah, 211 penal code. California. Yes.
You should have seen if you're listening, guys, you should have seen his face. He was like, just going to go with 211 penal code. Your face was so. Guys, I have my hat on because guess what? In October, we're having an Art of Tamada. Nicola's store helps to pay for the Art of Tamada preparations. It's Greenville, open air fun, music all weekend, tables all weekend. Bam, KP Restaurant, Art of Tamada. That's in October. November is still our Florida event, 6, 7, 8, 9 in the Keys. Hope to see you there. Now, here's Nicola guilting you in. Go, Nicola.
It's finally warming up. The sun is out, the air is crisp. Spring must be any day now. Overwhelmed with that one closet full of junk? Have you almost been eaten by your clutter? It's time to finally go through those boxes and storage you've been neglecting. You'll be surprised what you find. Instead of throwing out these used items, you can donate them to us, First Things Foundation, for 5 easy steps. We partnered with eBay Charity to list your items for 100% donation when purchased through our storefront. First, find the items you wish to donate. Step 2, take 2 to 5 pictures of your item. Step 3, email me, Nico Heers, at first-things.org. This is where you can include as much information about the selected item as possible, including the year you originally bought it, worth, product type, damage if any, and size. Don't forget to attach those pictures you took earlier. Once you've sent the email, you can sit back and relax. We'll list your item for you and be in communication with any possible buyers. Once it's purchased, we'll follow up with an email and prepaid shipping label for you to attach and send your item off. Step 5. Package it up, attach the label, and drop off at your local post office. With those easy steps, you've not only cleaned out your closet, but you've contributed in assisting local visionaries in their quest for a better life.
Rough, some rough writing lifestyle, kind of a cowboy, guy, in a way, like I don't know. I'll just leave it there and say that, that's how I got into writing books, is because I learned how do I get my credit so I can actually function in society? Because you literally have to,
Wow.
not just to buy, stuff on credit, per se credit cards, but even to rent an apartment, because they run these background checks on everything now.
Yeah.
And even to do any kind of, like say open up a bank account and even getting jobs now. So all that stuff was going on. And I was like, wow, how do you do this? And back in my day, as we say, us old guys, they didn't have like internet. You couldn't just like go on and click. And, oh, here's how you fix this, or here's how you go. Here's where you go for that. No, I actually had to go to the library, these places that they used to have where people would go and find these things.
I've heard of those places.
Read them and meet people, talk to, and find research. I learned how to do research. So that was my big thing, legal research. And I learned the laws, and I had a TRW security. I met these attorneys and people who knew the laws. And so I learned quickly kind of stuff that was like, you go to the library, how do you do this? And they would just tell you, oh, well, file bankruptcy or budget your money. And I'm like, well, okay, that's not what I'm looking for. I need to know, how do I clear my credit rating so I can actually rent an apartment, open an account, get a checking account, get a credit card. And that's how I learned how to do it in a way that nobody knew how to do it at the time.
You're like a parole officer's dream.
I found this publishing company. And people would ask me, wow, how'd you do that? And I would tell them. And then people say, oh, John Roberts, the guy who knows how to, if you got a bad credit, he can show you how to get it off your record. And I'm like, okay, I'll show you. Well, you do this, you do this. And I kept telling people the same thing. So I go, wait a minute, let me just write this down. And so that's how I started writing.
No kidding.
First you do this, you do this, do this. And then I kept telling people that I had this whole thing got longer and longer, this little stapled in the corner, typewritten.
You were like Wikipedia for these guys.
Well, that's what I would do. I was like a credit doctor. And then I had a publishing company called Paladin Press. It wasn't my company. It was a company that they used to publish these underground books on like how to make fake IDs and how to dodge the draft and how to
web.
Make, it was like an anarchist cookbook kind of stuff, not necessarily, I want to say bomb making per se, but more like detective and spy craft.
Right.
And so they had a contest once. They said, oh, we're looking for underground, how to beat the system books. And I'm like, oh, I got my little thing I typed up. It wasn't even in a manuscript form. I mean, it was literally stapled in the corner, literally typewritten, single spaced. It was like how to beat the credit bureaus or something like that, credit secrets. And I just sent it in on a lark. I'm like, I'll send them these. This kind of shows you how to beat the system. And so little did I know, like months later, I'm going to my post office box and it was like a letter, and it was like, congratulations, you've won our manuscript contest. We're going to send you $1,000 in a publishing contract for a book for how to the credit system. I'm like, oh, what? And so that's
You're
how
literally blowing people's minds right now. Anyone under 40 is like, what is happening? This is a great
I start writing
story.
books on credit. Yeah. And how to beat the system, and book called Life After Debt, DEBT. And I got hired by Capital One to be like their spokesperson.
No one has ever said this when they said, how did you start writing? This is the newest, coolest. This story alone is a book. What? So now Capital One wants you Life After Debt.
Yeah. I wrote books on how to get out of debt and, how to fix your credit, how to beat the system. And, I filed like lawsuits against CRW and stuff. I helped kind of lead some, consumer advocacy, movements to get people to, because systems were really messing people up too,
I remember this time you couldn't find out information. You wouldn't.
Yeah. So I helped turn that around. Not me personally, like I did it all myself, but I was an advocate who led like lawsuits and things against the credit system that made them have to give you a way to contact them and how to correct stuff, because they would put negative stuff on there or leave stuff on that wasn't true.
Yeah. And you couldn't get it off ever.
Yeah. So,
unbelievable. So that takes a type of handwriting. Let me put it this way, an authorship, a narrative. Yeah, you're right. Probably a really perfected narrative. Like you probably really had to be very, very particular with your words, right?
Yeah. Cause I was studying law. I mean, I ended up going to law school later, but, I didn't become a lawyer. I had a book on identity theft that I had publisher who had actually asked me to write. And that's how I ended up. I would meet with like the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, and I would do these talks on, the system and identity theft and things like that, because that was a new topic too. I was like on the Donahue show, if you remember like Phil Donahue.
Oh, they put you on Phil Donahue?
Yeah, I was on a lot of those.
Guys, that was like the biggest show going. That's like, I don't know who's got it.
Yeah, it was like with Oprah and that type.
Yeah, like Oprah. Oprah was the next biggest one after him. Wow. And then, that would be a big podcast today. Not this one, obviously.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming on mine.
Oh, yeah.
I had a Donahue guy on. Look at this, guys. This is amazing.
So anyway, that was back, and those were like, we're talking like 90s and early 2000s when all this was happening, this stuff. So that's kind of how the question back to how did I start writing books? Yeah. And so I wrote like several books on those topics. And then I later got into other areas. I started going more into, writing, creative writing. And I ended up being a master of fine arts in creative writing, which was more what I really wanted to do, because I was in law school and I took a break because they were saying, here, we want you to write this book on identity theft and do these book tours. And as I was writing that book, like 9/11 happened. And I was like, wait a minute, I got to make some changes in my book because I got to mention how these quote terrorists were using, these fake IDs, which they end up finding, fully, down there at the bottom of the burned up towers. It's like, hey, we just found this passport of this guy. I didn't put that in the book.
Just made it out of the fire. Yeah.
But that's all another story there. Don't even get me started.
Can we do that later? I get so fired up. But this is an interesting thing. So now, do I hear a cynical person here in the early 2000s? Because the guy I've spoken to in the books I've read, and there's a non-cynicism to your work. It's like a beautiful sweetness. Do you find orthodoxy? What's your God? Let's put it differently. What's your God conversation like, say, 2001 or right and then when you're starting to be on Phil Donahue? What are you thinking of God? Is Jesus a thing? Like, what's happening?
I have had, by that time, have had past tense, some God experiences. I grew up in the first Christian church, literally was the name of it, which.
Oh, they went big with that title. The first.
Yeah, exactly. We're like the quote disciples of Christ, and it was a good church. I grew up there. It was quote denomination that was based on, trying to be like the original Christians, so we read.
I've heard of those people. Oh, wait, like the Orthodox. So you started with like an Orthodox light. That's interesting.
Well, super light. Yeah. Cause it was not anything like, what we know of as the historic traditional church. We had, we took communion, but it was just, not like a fullness of the sacraments, etc. But anyway, so I had background in Christianity and I believed in Jesus Christ and I had basic understanding. I'd read the New Testament. I actually read through the whole Bible several times. I'd had kind of a semi wake up call, years ago in a down and out, jail, kind of experience where I was like, oh, my life's over. God help me. And then the Bible's sitting there. I'm like, well, let me read this, see what they're saying.
Let's try that. Right.
I'm like, oh, wow. Seeing the light semi, experience of, Christ is a real person, a real resurrection. That these are real events. And so I like, wait a minute. I'm not just thinking about this as like little fairy tales and stories. This is like personal. This isn't business, it's personal.
Right. This might inform everything one day.
Yeah. So there was that part of me that had that, but at the time, talking these early, like 2000s, writing these other books, that was like my life was like totally, I had just been out of the military for a few years and I was pretty much a wild character still.
Do you have a lady then? Do you have a wife? Lady? Girlfriend?
I had a few different girlfriends during that period. I had been married previously.
Oh, you tried out marriage too.
Yeah. That actually, I got married when I was in the military.
Did you guys hear?
While I was there.
Yeah.
And
Chad, I love you, man.
Didn't work out. I just wasn't, I'm a good person. Everyone was good. We had a child, who's now a son who's now grown in he became Orthodox.
Oh yeah.
God, just a couple of years ago. Glory to God. So I'm married now. I've been married, for 16 years almost now.
Wow.
15 years.
So the conversion is coming somewhere after 9/11.
Yeah, things have changed a lot after, that period of time. Trying to, I know I'm just going back and forth timelines, but I guess if I just maybe kind of fast forward through from there to here.
Yeah, do that.
The biggest shift occurred, I would say. I'd written these books on credit. Then I went through when I got my Master of Fine Arts, I started saying, when I was doing those other books, I realized talking about 9/11, I was like, wow, there's a lot of stories here, and I started writing these stories about identity theft in that book. And I was like, wow, these crazy, these terrorists are doing this and people are just getting their identity stolen. And so I wrote a screenplay about what if, you wake up one day and somebody just ripped off your whole identity and started doing all this crime in your name. And it's like, you had to and everyone thought you were the guy who was doing this stuff. And so that was a script that I wrote. And so I started thinking, I really want to do this kind of stuff. I'd rather write, stories and screenplays. And so I got my Master of Fine Arts in creative writing and screenwriting emphasis. And so then I ended up teaching screenwriting, and I had written my thesis was on Cecil B. DeMille and the original biblical epic. That was my whole, and I wrote a screenplay about his life. So he, for those who everyone's seen like the Ten Commandments, that huge movie with Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston, that was his last big epic.
And you wrote about Cecil B. DeMille. Yeah, he was a big dog there.
Yeah, so that informed me quite a bit reading about his life, because he'd had kind of a crazy wild life too. All this, lifestyle, Hollywood, Babylon type of stuff. And then he ended up becoming informed by Christianity. And when he tried to say, I need to save my family, my wife, my daughter, I really want to keep this. I want to live a good life. And so that's what made him dedicate to doing the biblical epics. And so he did like King of Kings, 10 Commandments, and many others. And he made like 70 movies. And he basically almost, quote, invented Hollywood in a way, because he came out here when it was like, they said, that's just nothing's in California. It's just orange groves and desert. We're talking like 100 years ago, 1917. And so when he came out with that idea I'm getting away from the Edisons, the Edison,
Sure.
trust was basically trying to control everybody and saying, oh, anyone making a movie or anything, which movies at that time were Nickelodeon, literally a 5-cent little peep show with like basically someone's a stripper or something, it was very not a positive.
You would drop it in and turn it, right?
Yeah, exactly. You'd crank a little thing on a boardwalk. And that was when you said movies, that's what they meant. And so he actually made it into like the feature, like a 70-minute, 80, longer stories. And he took Broadway plays and turned them into film, down in Southern California.
He's an inspiration for you.
Yeah. So that was a big informing. And then eventually, I got married again. That was my marriage that I have now currently is my second marriage. And so that, really was a major positive in my life because I know we went at one time to a Greek festival. And, I was like,
your wife was not Orthodox at the time and you weren't either.
No, it was just like, lived in the Bay Area because I was in Southern California. So I moved up here when we started, we lived in the Bay Area. And then that's how I ended up, let's go to the Greek festival over in Oakland. I'm like, okay, it'll be something like fun movie, music, dancing, food, gifts, I remember buying some gifts for my parents. And so I had no clue really what it had to do with other than just that music and dancing and food. And so little did I know
with donors' names on it.
Yeah. I didn't even give it any thought. I just was like, this is fun, something to do this weekend. And I remember, it's funny because I remember being I was a Protestant at the time, but I was pretty much way on the edge of it to the point where even though I'd been through like some New Age and some other crazy stuff, I was kind of just believing like all you have to, if you really just believe and just listen to God, he'll guide you, I don't need any external anything. And that was where I was at the time. But little did I know that not long after that visit to that we ended up, we celebrated our 7th anniversary, 7-8 years ago. And we ended up jumping out of airplane, doing, skydiving.
What?
Over Monterey, 18,000.
You and your wife?
Yeah. Yeah. That was pretty fun.
You don't seem like you would do that, John. John, you're not normal, but you seem normal. It's weird.
That's what they say. Yeah.
Look at you, just like, I feel if I went to a super with you, I just wouldn't hear anything. And then someone would say, yeah, like when I shot a guy and you'd be like, well, I'm going to tell you a little story. And then it would be crazy. Like you would know everything about everything, but you would seemingly say nothing. I love people like this. That's how you seem to me. You know everything. I'm not even sure I'm getting half of the information from you. You're sort of like, what's the film, John? Forrest Gump. But yeah, like it's weird. We could be on here for a long time, guys. Cause I feel like if I just scratch I feel like if I just say something like Lyndon B. Johnson, you'd be like, well, there was this, I was involved. I would be like, okay, John Lennon. I feel like you would know something. It's very cool. I could be wrong, but I feel that way.
Yeah, I don't know. God's been
there's a humility factor to you. Yeah, God has been, yes. So then, all right, but I got to get to the film because I want to show the people the trailer.
Oh yeah.
So because the film is amazing, but so your wife and you were married and the Greek church plays, you go back or something? How does it work?
Yeah, what happens is like a year or so later, a couple of years later, like I said, jumped out of an airplane, leap of faith there. And then I'd been like quit going to church for like 5 years. I was like, I'm just so tired of, like either people tell me that the end is going to happen on this date or, in order to be a Christian, you've got to be for this candidate or you've got to believe in this.
Israel.
Yeah. Whatever, background ideologies. And I was like, nah, everything seemed like everyone's telling me something totally opposite. So it's like, okay, how can this all be the one, Christian religion if you've got 10 people telling me totally opposite things and they're all disagreeing with each other? So I just said, I'm just done with this. And so finally I got to the point where I was like, I still need something, there's something missing. I need communion, community, connection. something that's just, me just believing, which is maybe true what I believe. The Bible has truth or is the truth. Jesus is the truth, way, truth, life. And I did believe those things, but I was also like, I can't just do this on my own without just,
it is, right?
Not really having anything connecting me physically into, the actual earth plane of reality and the day to day, what my life is about. And so that was where I just started searching a little bit more. And I was on the internet by this time and, just Googling around stuff. And I would just, watch videos for different topics. And I remember I was just doing like ancient Christianity or something or mysticism or something like that I was looking at. And I just happened to come across a video. It was a guy, Ted Nottingham, and he was actually a former, First Christian Church pastor.
No
which
way.
I didn't know that at the time.
Wow.
He's to be that. And then, but he become Orthodox. And so he wasn't even really talking about Orthodox. He was just talking about, spirituality and, he was talking about Gurdjieff and all kinds of other things, but he just he kind of like very subtly placed these things in there. And he says, in the early church, worshipped, fully in their body. And they would show these pictures of the Orthodox church and people bowing and making the sign of the cross and incense and all that. And I was like, wow, I never heard of that. And so then, when he said that, I was like, I'm in the Bay Area and I go, I wonder if there's any quote Orthodox church near me. Google. I'm like, whoa, boom, they're all like all over the place.
All over.
And so I started looking at them and I started actually saying, wow, I wonder what they're actually like. And then there was like all Serbian this, Greek that, Bulgarian. I'm like, okay, I'm not really into those kind of groups. So I don't know where should I even go. I just kind of like looked around at what was close to me. And then I started, reaching out online and I found like there was different websites, like that were, looking for the ancient faith, type of thing. And so I found, just some resources that, journeytoorthodoxy.com was one. And I've met, talked to the priest there and he was saying, oh, well, there's some people there. You might, meet this person or that person. So I started visiting churches and then eventually I actually just started going to one and I started finding, I found a cathedral. Someone said, oh yeah, this is a really good priest.
What town is this? Is this Sacramento?
Well, no, this is in Oakland, in the Bay Area. I lived in Walnut Creek at the time.
Walnut Creek. I know that town.
Yeah.
Concord? You ever heard of Concord?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, it's right down the street.
I did 2 years of high school there. It's very confusing. I lived a lot of places, but mostly New York. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I found the church was through that, the Journey to Orthodoxy and other things online, websites. And then I started going to this one church that someone had recommended. And then as I started going there, I remember talking to my wife and, she would come sometimes too. And she'd say, oh, okay, this is interesting. And then I remember one day she was asking, are you still going to that church, that you were started going to? And I go, yeah. And I go, where's that? We should go to that Greek festival we went to that one time. Remember that one time? And she goes, yeah, that's the church that you're going to. I'm like, what?
That's the same place where you were going. I
know. So I think that when I went to that Greek festival, they must have been praying for me or I was walking over, on top of some relics or something, because it's a cathedral.
You don't know, but it's true. Something happened.
Yeah. They were like praying over the baklava and say, here, take one of these. It's got.
And the Greeks took you in because this is an interesting question. Mm-hmm. In the film, in the trailer, you can see it, but it's also in the film. There's a sense that there's a true identity. There's something higher than, say, you're being a man. There's something higher than being black or white. There's something higher than there's something like a true identity, right? And it sounds like maybe could you get past the Greek identity and get into the liturgical identity?
My godfather's Greek. I got baptized in the Greek Orthodox Church. I had, and it's interesting because it's a big cathedral. I mean, there's people from Eritrea there and Djibouti and Mexicans, Japanese, Spanish, Russians, many Russians.
During all that, did you ever think that I've often had this thought? In fact, we went to an Ethiopian Orthodox church in the Bronx just like for a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have that draw toward, say, the African Orthodoxy? Did it ever like stick out for you?
I looked at it a little bit. I had never really started going to it, but I remember reading, years and years ago. This is a quick aside. I remember reading, I think it was Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver when I was a kid. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yep.
And I remember him talking about, like when he was in prison, he was like a Black Panther, for those who don't even know who I'm talking about. Black Panther, and I read a lot of that kind of literature, when I was younger, kind of revolutionary, type of guy, et cetera. But I remember one of the things he said in there, and he was actually going to he was in San Quentin, and he was going to like a kind of a Bible study there, which I later found that actually Sarah from Rose actually was part of that group that taught that. Yeah, I know all these little connections here. And so, but I remember him talking about, learning about the Bible, Eldridge Cleaver, and saying, he was learning about it, but he says, I didn't know if I want to become a Christian, but if I was going to be, I'd join like the Coptic. Yeah. Because that's like, Egyptian and African origins. And I just remember that always stuck out with me, just thinking, I wonder what that, I don't even know what that even means, Coptic. Right. And so, like I said, I do know now, I have friends, who are actually from Egypt, and they're actually, coming to to the Greek and the Russian Orthodox churches. But, it was
fascinating because
connected.
This is late 90s in the Bronx, and that church was packed, and it was packed with young African-American men who all found their way in. And it was almost like Ortho Bros before Ortho Bros.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
And they were black guys. And they were all finding their way sort of out of whatever that rhythm of the hood was. And then, and finding their way into this liturgical tradition. It was quite beautiful, to be perfectly honest. It was quite wonderful.
That. Yeah, because I know a lot of guys went into, probably still do like the black Muslims and groups like that too, because they're looking for something that's strong, which, you can acknowledge it for that. You have like, the Andrew Tates and those guys, they're still going that direction. Unfortunately, is not, what we would suggest, as far as the Orthodox, the Christian direction. But people are looking for something more than what Christianity,
the Orthodoxy provides the home, the motherland, if you want to, that's Theotokos. It provides the Holy Land that when I was looking at the trailer, I thought, and I'll ask you this in a second, but I thought it feels like to have true identity, you have to have a holy land. I want to get into that with you for a second, but Orthodoxy provides all that, and also a different conversation about freedom. So for me, what was attractive for me is I kind of needed it too. I came out of the Episcopal church, but then also got a little wild. I went off to, Peace Corps in Africa, and then I was pretty wild. And then basically Orthodoxy was like, yeah, this is a brotherhood, and here are the rules, and there's lots of them. And also it's up to you, because I can't really help you, because freedom's a bitch. Freedom's hard. And it was like both, right? It's like, yeah, this is what we do. We fast. And also I'm not going to make you fast. So there was something good about it. And, but also there was a cohesion that I needed, and I found that there was a balance in Orthodoxy. And I think a lot of those guys in the Bronx were finding that balance too. Yeah. So let's show the film right now. I'll show the trailer, just the trailer. Andrew will cut it in right now. And then, we can talk about it, and then maybe how you got to making it. So let's just look at it real quick.
St. Peter gave his life for Christ.
That story of his courage as a young man, it shows how the cross is something that we embrace in our weakness.
Christ, Jesus Christ our God, hallowed this land in the streams of Peter's blood.
People are hungry. The world is very loud and noisy.
People are dissatisfied. They're restless. And they're looking for answers to that restlessness.
People in general have a sense that something's not right, there's not enough.
They are burdened with this question, what is my identity? Who am I? When Peter the Aleut was being persecuted, he kept repeating over and over again, all the stories say, I am a Christian.
This is Holy Land because of the saints.
Faith is something lived, and it's something that we enter into. We want to know God.
We're saved by people like St. Peter. We're saved by everyone who bears their cross.
How'd you get to this point? Like, not that whole story again, but what made you want to make this film?
Yeah, the biggest inspiration for me for this film was the movie Sacred Alaska.
Yeah,
I saw that film. When it first came out, we had a screening here in Sacramento, which is where I live now, and Robin Inacentia Wellman, we used to work at Fort Ross, as a friend of mine who I knew, already. And she actually hosted the director, Simon Skamaka.
He was on our
house.
He was on our pod.
He was on your show too.
Mm-hmm.
And we did the screening at a local theater here. And I was just so moved by that film, which I highly recommend to anyone, Sacred Alaska, that, it was like months later, I was still talking about it. And I was telling people, you know what? And I remember going to, we had a, what's it called? A Holy Unction service, before Pascha, where they have, holy oil and many, we had like 7 different
beautiful
priests.
Service. Yeah.
Yeah. And we had that service. And so that was just like a couple of months or so after seeing Sacred Alaska. It had been in my mind and my heart. The biggest part of that story was really just the beauty, not just the beauty of Orthodoxy, but the beauty of the native people and their faith that existed before the missionaries came.
Right.
But also how saints like Saint Innocent, Saint Herman of Alaska and others came to them and condescended to them by acknowledging them, learning their language, loving them, not saying, oh, here, you got to start, wearing a suit and tie now, and you got to start speaking, our language, and, you can't, dance or do these, totem poles.
This is our connection. Me and you.
They were just loving.
This is our philosophy, first things. Yeah. And that's why your movie and St. Herman, it's just so beautiful, right?
Yeah. So that was my inspiration. And then when I came out of the Holy Unction service, I was thinking, and I was actually saying, I said, you know what? We need like a Sacred California movie, because they not only went to Alaska with that love and truth and beauty and goodness, but, now those same saints came to California, and they came to Fort Ross, which I'd been to many times. And most people, and I grew up in California, and we took, California history, and we learned about the missions, and we learned about the Royal Highway, Camino del Rey, etc., and did not learn about
Fort Ross,
the Russian part of it, or the Northern California.
Will you tell us about Fort Ross right now, guys? It's a very cool story, but the basics.
That was the inspiration was that movie, and then Fort Ross itself. And then I knew, Robin, Inacentia. I knew several people who had had these transformational experiences and became Orthodox in the time that I knew them. And I was actually not part of them becoming Orthodox directly, but knowing them before and after, and seeing, just like in my own case, how suddenly you can have, God can just show you something that you like, just do it like a double take, say, wait, what was that again? It's like, oh, I didn't even know there was this Orthodox church, they say hidden secret or whatever, that you just walk past it. And like I said, I grew up in Santa Maria. In fact, it's named after the Virgin Mary, Saint Mary.
Yeah, that's true.
And our high school team was called the Saints. And it's like, when you drive past it, it says home of the saints. And so I grew up not even knowing really what a saint was.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, or, really giving a lot of thought to the Virgin Mary, thinking, anything much about that, whole realm. So now seeing Fort Ross, seeing the saints of Sacred Alaska, St. Herman, and then I found St. Peter the Aleut, and then St. John of San Francisco. And I find that there are saints among us, even, let's say today, we don't know necessarily who's quote a saint, but we know that they do exist, and they are people like us
walking around
who have just dedicated themselves, and in many cases, to their end of their life, and just were willing to sacrifice, much more than, something I would feel like I could do personally. But, we admire them, just like most of us. You can say, oh, I admire this sports star, even though I know I'm not going to be Michael Jordan or whatever, but you could like and admire his dedication, his effort, his ability, his skills. I mean, and obviously comparing him to a saint is not the same thing, but it's still.
But no, but it's important,
similar.
I think, people to understand that it's an okay thing to talk about the assesses, right? The athleticism. Mm-hmm. That's the Greek word for
they're athletes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And they're spiritual athletes. And it really applies, and it takes away some of the mystery that stops, let's say, Protestants from understanding what's actually happening when you can compare it to the process of a Hall of Fame, for example. For instance, a Hall of Fame shows you all the people that are remembered, but there's a lot of other basketball players. And they may be just as good, but no one really knows. But these are the ones we remember. And when you start to think like that, you can start to realize that holiness is on many layers and levels. And so it's not a far away thing, because for us Protestants coming up, that was a far away. It's almost like it was fake. Like that's for back then when people could do stuff, or the other narrative is there's not really saints. That was the church being corrupt and there were fake bones, and it's not real. You don't need all that. And what I'm trying to say in this, and using your words, is to say something like, no, guys, it's happening right now. It's right around us. It may be your neighbor and you don't know, and it's okay. And God will reveal them, right? My favorite thing is they're starting now. There's this Georgian guy I know that, well, I don't know him very well, but he lives on a pillar. He's a stylite in Georgia.
Wow.
And there's talk in my in the little village where we are, that they might start to write his icon.
Wow.
All that means is somebody's going to start drawing him.
Yeah.
And then there's another monk there that I talked to. There's a body that they found. I want to tell you this real quick. It's fascinating. It's called the Zarzma Monastery. I walked in there not too long ago this year, and the monk was showing us around the church, and then he walked us to the side chapel, and there in the side chapel was his body.
Wow. It's
sort of laying there. Its face is covered with cloth, but its bones, you can see all the bones from under the robe, and they have skin. It has skin. It's incorrupt, but it's not perfect, but you get it. It's incorrupt, and it's open, and it's just laying there. And I was like, whoa, Father, is this a saint? And he was like, well, we don't know. So check this out, Robert, or John. I was like, well, what do you mean you don't know? He goes, well, we were out tending to the bones of all the monastics, because, they bury them, and then they exhume them, and then take the bones and skull, the leg bones and arm bones and the skull, and they stack them, in the ossuary beneath the monastery. And they were doing that. And he said, then we walked down the hill, pretty far, and there was a grave just sticking out. We don't know what happened. Maybe there was an earthquake. There was the water ran, and it was up. And we looked over, and then we found his body, and it was not decayed.
Wow.
We thought, what's going on with that? We didn't know what to do. We asked around and said, nobody knows who that is. So we just took him and put him in the church.
Wow.
I said, is he a saint? He's like, I don't know.
That's wild.
He's laying there right now. I could go take it. And they don't even know his name, but they said, well, maybe God will show us who he is. So they keep him in the church. It's nuts. So
that's awesome. Well, that was one of the first things, guys. When I saw St. John of San Francisco, which, I mean, to me, even the name Saint, saying there's a saint of San Francisco. I'm like, wait, what? St. John of San Francisco. And my name's John now, from John the theologian, who's the apostle, who I obviously knew who that was, but I didn't know about these other ones, like, we're talking about. And then there's St. Sebastian in Jackson.
I have his icon. We have his icon in the house.
Yeah. So I've seen him, and I've seen, and they're both, like in Sacramento, where we are in Northern California, we have both of those saints like in driving distance from us.
Yeah, so Sebastian was an American. Well, he was in the Serbian church, but basically,
he was born in America. He was baptized literally in a Russian ship off the coast of San Francisco during the Civil War. Because, believe it or not, that's just a quick aside, the Russians came to America, the East and West Coast, during the Civil War to support the North and Abraham Lincoln, because the French and English were supporting the Confederacy.
How far
that's all the story there, but that was how the Russians were there with their Orthodox church, in St. Sebastian, who was born in San Francisco, was baptized on a Russian ship.
Yeah, and he started a bunch of churches.
Yeah, he was a great missionary.
Your project, first of all, that was a beautiful trailer. And the pacing and those decisions, they're yours, right? You're the director.
Yeah, I'm the director and executive producer. And then, speaking of Sacred Alaska, Silas Carbo, he was the producer of Sacred Alaska. And so he's my main cinematographer and editor. So I give him really a lot of the credit for actually, cutting,
he's creating a lot of the shots
and shooting. Yeah. And we were able to bring this thing together. And I have another friend who's a military person who happened to be able to come, and he was also a cinematographer. And he came, and he also was able to shoot. And so we were able to shoot all this film at like 10 different locations,
and you have the final cut now. You just made it, right? It's out.
Yeah. I haven't put it out yet to the public, because I literally just got the final cut literally like yesterday.
Yesterday. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
So yeah, I wanted to just let me just put it out there.
Cutting things final, because it's hard to be to cut that final piece.
Yeah. So it's done, and I've seen it several times. My wife's seen it. Nobody else has really seen, other than, the person working on it yet, because I was going to just almost drop it on the website and just send it out to everyone. And then she's like, no, we're going to do a couple private screenings.
Yeah.
I have one here with Robin in Akintia. We're scheduling that right now. I just, I have to.
Do you know what has not made its final cut? A movie called Christianities.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. Well, that one's got a lot of. You guys have a lot of locations.
We got juice on that. We got cool locations, and
that's a huge.
There's money rolling in. We're having some legal problems on where to place it. Legal problems here. Don't hear. Nobody's in jail or anything. I
know what you mean.
We're trying to LLC it and make sure that yada yada. You know what I'm talking about.
Right. I know.
Movie makers know this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's close, and you should see the production schedule. It's cool, but this isn't about our movie, but we don't have a final cut, not even close. So I get a lot of texts like, what's going on with that movie? A lot. We love you, but yours is out. So now tell me about how you're going to release it. You're going to do private screenings.
Yeah. I'm going to start with the private screenings. And then I'm going to we have our website, AmericanOrthodoxFilm.com. So what I would suggest anyone is just, if you go to that website, and maybe your producer can put a link to that, AmericanOrthodoxFilm.com, because that's where you can see the trailer there. You can see the books that it's based on, the American, book, so there's a lot of information about it, that I've written.
We'll link all that, John. We'll link it all.
And, that's where it will eventually, And hopefully sooner than later, we'll actually put it on the website, the link directly to the film there. Because I was thinking originally, we were thinking of doing more bigger theatrical types of things, which we know we did with what they did with Sacred Alaska. But I think my goal here is I want to get a larger reach with it, as soon as I can. I'm not saying that to say, oh, I'm just going to put it on YouTube and just run it, like that. But eventually that may happen. But I just want to get it, to a few people to see it first, people who are involved in it, particularly because we interviewed a lot of priests. We have bishops in there.
Sure,
and we've got,
sure.
higher level, people. And then plus, Fort Ross, this is a little thing here. October 4th, Fort Ross Pilgrimage is a major, it's a 100-year anniversary event at Fort Ross. And that's this year, October 4th.
And
that
Fort
we
Ross,
want to have,
you're going to have a party. You're going to show the film there, right? On October 4th.
Yeah. Most likely, we'll screen it there, but also it'll be screened, way before that. So we're still only in May
Fort
now.
Ross, guys, plays a huge role because it was a Russian fort, populated by all these sort of hard driving Russians that also becomes then a home for Orthodoxy, the first Orthodox presence in North America, correct?
Yeah. Five saints actually walked those, streets and floors in Fort Ross.
You named him, right? St. Herman.
Yeah. Well, no, St. Herman of Alaska wasn't in there.
He
It was
didn't come down that part,
Innocent, St. Tikhon, St. Peter the Aleut, St. John of San Francisco, and St. Sebastian.
St. Sebastian.
Those five saints all were at Fort Ross.
Wow.
And some of them actually gave liturgies, there and actually served in the chapel there.
Mm-hmm.
St. Peter the Aleut, his story is really highlighted in the film. He was a young boy, basically native Alaskan from Alaska, and came down to do, hunting and fishing and so forth with the Russian American company. And then, he has a tragic, but very moving, story that occurred. So he would be having gone to Fort Ross as kind of a stopping point, because that was like where people would come from Alaska. They'd land, it's on Bodega Bay, which is northern, along the Highway 1 here in California.
Can we end with a quick conversation about my favorite part of the film? It's a question that I want to return to. Mm-hmm. Can we end with that? Because if we go too long, then Andrew, my editor, will just say that it's too long, and then he'll yell at me. He's got some rule about how long people can listen, and I don't follow any of those rules, John. But I don't care about that. Well, I do care. I want to build our channel. See, I can't build channels. I don't know what this is.
That's why we didn't make the movie too long either, by the way, because I wanted it to be like,
Yeah, you and I, you wanted like Terrence Malick, like an 8-hour. He handed an 8-hour cut to whatever for a Thin Red Line. They were like, what are we supposed to do with
that's a good movie too.
It's incredible. But if you notice, George Clooney shows up for like 1 minute at the end. That's right. Because it was like 5 more hours of the film. And
people, especially now, these last few years, people can't sit through an hour or more.
No, they can't do it. But here's the question that may, at least looking and reading your books, and it feels like this right now. There's this whole movement. It's not Orthodox people, but some of them. There's a whole movement in America to do something like whiteify or make white something like America. Like white nationalism gets wound up in Christianity because they want to make sacred again something like, I don't know, a home for white people. And what I was thinking of in watching your trailer and reading the books is I do think you can't really have a true identity if you don't have a holy land. For instance, like living in Ethiopia for a short time, it was really clear what their identity was. It was Aksum, and it was the church of St. Mary, where everyone who was in that part of the world knew themselves to be attached to that church, which was holy because it held the ark. And obviously this is the feeling you get when you go to Israel, both for Jews and Christians and so Muslims. What I'm trying to say is I think your film does a nice job of making me wonder about the highest identity is when you have a holy land, which actually for the Orthodox is not about whiteness at all. It's the opposite, actually. It's about altar. It's like the highest identity is the altar where Christ is sacrificed and resurrected. It's like the highest identity is a person. It's like an act.
Absolutely.
By a person, And so I always try to think, whenever I hear this conversation online that I really don't like, I always think you guys are shooting so low. Like, shoot so much higher, when it comes to what identity is and your true identity. Like, you don't need to drag around some scientific idea of race. It seems dumb. Like, just go to the altar and you'll find your true identity. And I think your film speaks to that. How do you think I'm onto something? Or
and I didn't think of those ideas that you're talking about weren't like in my mind, directly. I didn't think anything about race or that type of ethnicity types of things. However, as you're mentioning them, I do, hearken to, our prayers, and seeking, the most holy virgin, and, blessing our Christian race.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The Christian race. That's the only race that really, our identity is tied to, because even the quote, children of Israel, when they came out of Egypt into the holy, promised land, they weren't all one ethnicity.
That's right. That's right.
You know that. I mean, even Moses married a black, Ethiopian woman, and many of their Egyptian, even, servants and others who were there, they became part of Israel by simply taking part in their sacraments. Right. Eventually to become a part of Israel, it was like the male would get circumcised and they would just have, they would celebrate the Passover.
There it is right there. Yeah.
And so anyone who becomes part of the church, and just like if you look at even, the Byzantine quote, empire, St. Constantine, that whole empire became Christianized, wasn't all because of what, oh, wait a minute, what's your skin color? Or let's see.
Yeah.
That's the paper bag test.
That's right. Are you Greek? Wait a minute.
It's about, we have the same faith, one Lord, one faith, one baptism.
Right. That's the highest level.
Yeah,
right.
That's the highest level. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And same thing, look at St. Vladimir, of Kiev. I mean, these are pagan, and they had, Vikings, and they had, people from the
same. You're right. Absolutely. There's a crossover there.
Where they brought those tribes together by let's get everyone the baptism of Rus. If anyone wants to have an amazing story, which to me, I know there's movies called like Viking, etc., that talk about like the Vladimir the Great, Prince Vladimir. That's an amazing story about.
That's a great story. And by the way, if you notice that story, again, what I was trying to say is he makes the land holy, therefore you can join the holy land.
Yeah, everyone
that's your identity.
Yeah, Christ says everyone, even without money, so it's not about your class, your race,
right,
your language, your color of your skin, your DNA. It's like it's a Christian DNA. I mean, we become born again.
By the way, fantastic. It is a Christian DNA. You're right. And you could argue through the Eucharist, through communion, our DNA has changed. I love that idea, which is
we are in the same body, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh.
Our bodies are physically changed.
We have the blood.
We become brothers.
And body.
Yeah. And I think about that. Peter the Alley, who really is focus in your film.
Yeah, and the blood of the martyrs is the seeds of the church. So we're growing up in those seeds, that were planted by martyrs. Juvenali is one, St. Peter, and there's others. Brother
It's ironic too. It's ironic, right? Because when you were looking at churches to go to that might be Orthodox, you like the Serbian one, no. The Greek one, no. And it's ironic, which I always try to tell people. That's really not about the faith. It's about the language of the people in there and what they're going to speak. That doesn't really out. It doesn't mean anybody's out. It means everybody's still in. So the Latins, they kind of put it all, the Romans, Catholics all put it all in the Latin, but now they've broken apart again into all types of, local languages. But I find that ironic. Your story has you trying to filter through which one. I had to do it too. I started with the Russians and I've ended with the Russians. By the way, I found out this too, John. Apparently an Antiochian guy told me that in his parish, the Paschal season is like for all the way to
Pentecost.
To Pentecost. The feasting, they don't have any fasting again.
I've heard that too.
What
and I spent some time with the Antiochian
Russian
churches too. I love them. We have 14 Orthodox churches in Sacramento.
14?
So I spent a lot of time in the Russian Orthodox church, Ya lublю rусский язык.
So that means you're fasting. They give you like 5 days off, and then you're back on it.
I'm in the OCA now is where I go, but there's, we have so many churches. I visit, all of them. I'm going to the Greek festival this weekend coming up again in Oakland. And then, like I said, I went to wedding at, the Antiochian. Actually, it was at a Serbian church. So it's like, we've got them all.
I went to your Palestinian parish.
Yeah.
Father, he was great. I can't remember his name right now.
Father Paul Baba?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the Antiochian, church.
It's Antiochian, but mostly we're Palestinians there. I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Many Palestinians and Lebanese, Arab speaking, but it's, most of the people there now are actually American converts.
Yep.
A lot of young men.
Yep.
Coming in there, and Mexican, American, Native American, Russians, there's like someone who's related to Saint Innocent's family that's there. There's, serious.
It's wild right now. Well, I think your movie and your books, you have a big project. You have a trilogy of ID, right? All three books are out.
Yeah. The second one's Light Journey, which is, it gets more into, other saints, and it also speaks a lot about Brother Jose, the Murberryan icon, Iveron icon in Hawaii, as well as in Montreal, and that whole story. And I actually have a direct connection.
Wait, he was murdered, this story.
Yeah. And the day that he was murdered, October 31st, 1997, that's my sobriety date.
Really?
So I literally woke up in the county jail. That's a whole other story. And became a Christian.
It all started in
of Brother Jose's death. And anyway, so there's a connection there. And I've seen the Murberryan icon, immersed streaming icon, the Hawaiian one. There's a connection between those two. And there's actually a connection to them and Father Seraphim Rose. Just as far as timing and just kind of one leads to the other. And the third book is Voice in the Wilderness, which is the
Father Seraphim Rose,
on the life and legacy of Father Seraphim Rose. So I've been up to Platina many times, and Father Paul Baba, who you just mentioned, he was a disciple of Father Seraphim Rose. And so same thing, your brother has a very strong,
he's
did a lot of
talks
about the Orthodox Survival Course. So I basically blend in what I've heard from people and what I've seen in Abbott, Damascene up there.
I want to say something to you. With this work of mine in the restaurant and just meeting people and doing supers, there is a group of real, honest, beautiful, American-centered Orthodox, I would call them missionaries, and I think you're one of them. And it's people who are remembering the things we need to remember about America without overemphasizing the American part or overemphasizing the Russian part. This is how it's all being born. I want to thank you because your work and Sacred Alaska and all these folks, you're being woven together. And in 300 years, you'll see it'll all be in there. We're not recognizing it right now, but it's in there. So much love to you. And this is the beginning of us hopefully having conversations, because come check back in with me when the movie's out, okay?
Yeah, I can get you a private link so you can actually see it.
And I can talk about it, and I already know it's going to be good just from the the beauty of that trailer. And if there's anything you want to end with, let people know. We'll definitely link all this. Andrew will link it all, and they can click and find out more.
Well, I really I appreciate you, John, and I appreciate First Things Foundation. I'm glad just to be a part of, what you do there, just even my little contribution to encourage people to do the same.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
And looking forward to Christianities. That's going to be awesome.
Me too.
We can't wait. And I just encourage people to watch, go to the American Orthodox film.com website. And that's basically where you're going to get the updates. And so, you can actually tell us, put your info if you want us to let you know when the film is available, but it will be on that website. So just keep checking into it. And please share those links, for anyone else out there. So thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. And thanks for all you do.
I'm blessed to have you. And by the way, next time we'll just do full 100% bad boy transparency, because I didn't even get into it. I was in an African jail once. How about that?
Yeah.
How about you and I? That'll just be the down. That's
I was probably like mine was probably like the Hilton compared to what you experienced.
There was a scout was only in there for 2 days. That was a little nerve wracking. That's another conversation.
Thank God for His grace and His mercy, because mercy endureth forever.
Amen. Amen. All right. Well,
Christ is risen.
Georgia, Christ is risen. Christ is risen. We'll see you guys. John Hammond. Check out his stuff. Peace out.
Thank you. Bye.
Guys, that was movie maker John Hammond. This is my Georgian hat. Georgia gets a lot of talk on here. We really need to calm it down. It's not about Georgia. It's about human beings. It's just that we work there and stuff happens there and we keep going there. And so I wear a hat. But I got Sierra Leonean stuff. That's what I'm going to wear next time. Or Mozambique stuff. I got to go back. I'm sending 2 field workers there. Did I tell you that we got what cool stuff coming out for the Art of Tamada? Yeah, more art stuff in Greenville. October 23, 24, 25, 26, right in there. You can find it on the website. Isla Mirada. Isle Mirada in the Keys. November 6th, 7, 8, 9. Do it. See you guys later. This is Heavy Things Lightly. This is my Georgian hat. And this was a rye bourbon. Peace out.